How's it going, boys? TKC here. Welcome back to the first of a brand new series I'm starting called Revisited, where I'm going to be going over and reviewing older EDM projects from back in the day. I was planning to review the Tritone EP by Chime, Frankie Nuts, and Olivers. However, after watching Naughty Step's review of that project, he kind of hit every point that I was gonna make, and overall just kind of made my review redundant. So I've moved over to a different project, which is this one. And you may be asking yourself right now,
TKC, where's the Illenium Ascend Tour Davin signed jersey you always hang up on your wall?
Yes, it is signed by Davin, by the way. Here's a signature, and here's a really photo of me with him. Meanwhile, I'm wearing it today to celebrate the album that I'm going to be reviewing today, which is going to be Ashes by Illenium. Ashes was released on February 15, 2016, which as of recording marks the 5-year anniversary of the debut album from Illenium, one of the most widely renowned artists in the EDM scene currently to date. Every fan of melodic dubstep, melodic bass, future bass, whatever you want to call it, looks back at this album as one of the pioneers of the subgenre, paving the way for not only Seeking Blue as a label, but also for Illenium himself. Since the release of Ashes, Illenium has gone to release 2 more albums with Awake and Ascend, with another one coming on the way later this year in 2021, as he continues to drive up his popularity and success with each new song. The popularity of the project ultimately has advanced the demand for melodic bass as a subgenre, not only in the grand scheme of EDM, but especially the North American scene, helping artists such as Seven Lions, Midas, Dabin, and Said the Sky build an even larger audience than originally before. With the mark of the 5-year anniversary of the album, and melodic bass as a subgenre seemingly more popular than it has ever been before, it only seems fitting to review this project. Since I've also never done a review before, I kind of want to go over how I'm going to do things and how I'm going to format my reviews. I'll quickly go over my personal thoughts on each track in summary before going over the project as a whole, considering 3 main categories that I feel are of the utmost importance for a project to have: innovation, sound quality, and execution. The album kicks off beautifully with, in my opinion, one of the best tracks on Ashes, Reverie featuring King Deco. Reverie goes for the true euphoric, airy vibe a lot of melodic bass tends to aim for today, with riveting guitar riffs, soaring emotional female vocals, and extremely powerfully melodic drops. In terms of verses, Reverie honestly hasn't even aged a day. The verses are still top-notch and have a very fresh, high-quality sound that still managed to capture the viewer's attention. That being said, while I still enjoy the drops, I find the drop has aged just slightly. The current melodic bass scene tends to feature extremely smooth trance-like sound design, some perfect examples being Seven Lions and Last Heroes. Reverie presents itself with a slightly grittier lead, with background melodies such as beautiful keys that tend to get slightly lost in the mix. The overall fullness of the sound, however, adds up to what we can expect in modern-day melodic bass, and for the most part is still a track that stands strong in the scene for me personally. Following Reverie is one of the most iconic tracks off the album, Fortress featuring Joni Vitora. Lots of my points for Reverie stand true for Fortress as well. However, Fortress tends to go with a slightly darker feel while still staying in major key. The verses once again feature gorgeous female vocals and the always great Illenium guitar riffs often featured in his works. The drop as an idea works beautifully even in 2020, mostly featuring a pluck that is still present in modern day melodic bass, my best example being Alchemy by Far Out. That being said, I feel the same way about the saws in the drop that tend to sound a little bit more noisy than I'm used to, along with the drums being slightly overrepresented in the verse mix. Overall, a solid track, however one I don't feel as strong about compared to the likes of Reverie and some of the other tracks on this album. The album takes a drastic turn of sound with the song With You with Quinn92. With You approaches with a more chill pop vibe, while importantly still maintaining a strong presence with production. While not necessarily my style, and a track I don't find myself returning to very often, if at all, this track has not aged a day and still has a really clean sound that could be seen in 2021. With You contains some amazing fitting background elements, such as the violin towards the end of the track, along with some gorgeous chimes and bells that play towards the beginning of the second half. Not much else to say with the lack of a drop being present, but just a clean track that does its job really well overall. After a quick break in style, Illenium returns right back to the melodic bass format present in the first two tracks, with Sleepwalker featuring Joni Vitora once again. Sleepwalker on the verses side manages still to this day to be some of the most emotionally beautiful work I've heard, with some incredible filter work on not only the acoustic guitar in the beginning, the drop synth that plays through the builds, but also Joni Vitora's incredible vocals. Everything about these verses has not aged a day. Along with the verses, the drops present themselves with some of the best sound design on the album, and some incredibly moving fills that enhance the drop ideas tenfold. That being said, despite backing elements being one of the strong points on this album, the drop tends to come off as slightly basic, being very lead forward despite the inclusion of vocals. These tend to drown out the drops in my opinion, but here in this case enhance the drops just a little bit. Probably one of my favorites off the album as a whole, and it remains a track I still actually enjoy to this day. The album then leads towards It's All On You, a darker, faster, melodic bass tune on the album. The track honestly has not aged a day, and contains some extremely full drops that meet 2021 standards, clean sound design, and some really interesting vocal chops that add more layers to the drop. The verses are beautifully crafted, with numerous filtered and unfiltered guitars, and the mix quality is perfect with all the instruments coming in at the right volumes, one of the biggest problems I have with older projects. Add in the vocal performance from Liam O'Donnell, which is one of my favorites off this album, and you've got an absolute banger of a track I still return to. Illenium teams up with Sound Remedy and the aforementioned King Deco to produce more of a melodic dubstep tune in spirals. Honestly, a track that's never been one I've grown to love very much. I find that while King Deco's vocals flow beautifully over the verses with an incredible melody, the verses really don't progress a lot in terms of extra instruments, and as a result tend to drag on far too long, with the first drop coming in at the 2-minute mark. The drops are also one of the most egregious examples of age on this project. Despite the very nice keys that play in the second half of the drops, and the overall backing elements, the main lead once again has more of that noisy, grainy profile, and while the automation near the end of the 4 beats is cool, becomes slightly overplayed as the drops near the end. Just overall, one I'm not too big on and one I don't return to very often. After a couple more melodic bass tracks, the album then veers very similarly towards With You, with the also very similarly named track Without You featuring Skylar. I think this track does what With You does, but to a much greater degree overall. The use of bells and chimes is an incredible touch I've always enjoyed in EDM, and Skylar's vocals are probably my favorite vocal performance on this entire album, with just the right amount of power, but also that soaring euphoria factor that female vocals often come with. Not to mention, also without a doubt, the cleanest mix on the entire album, with every element perfectly mixing together to make, in my opinion, the most underrated track of any Illenium album to date. This is one of those tracks that doesn't even need a drop despite being on an EDM album. Just an absolute vibe throughout, and I fail to understand why this track never gets the love it deserves. After Without You, the album heads into one of the most conflicting tracks for me personally, only one featuring Nina Sung. The verses once again deliver massively here with that really nice bubbly sound with the filtered guitar and another top tier vocal performance on this album with Nina Sung's vocals. The drops are probably the most unique of the bunch, with a combination of warm backing saws, a strong prominent lead that switches up throughout the drop, and the occasional showing up of vocals. I'm not too big on the lead's melody and find it moves around a little too much with a pretty unfulfilling melody. However, the saws are clean in sound and have some really great automations, keeping the idea fresh throughout. One I kinda love a lot about, but doesn't deliver just on the execution side of things. Penultimately on the album, Illenium takes a massive switch in sound with I'll Be Your Reason. If I ever listen to the album, this is just one I skip. I find the trap vibe doesn't exactly fit with the theme the album's going for, with these powerfully emotional melodic bass drops. I find too much of the elements here collide with each other. The verse production comes off as very bubbly, like Only One, however has these really dark vocals and lead into just this empty, unfulfilling trap drop even when considering it came out in 2015. One I've just never been a fan of song-wise, and rarely do I say this, even inclusion in the album. And lastly, probably the most iconic song off Ashes for the right reasons is Afterlife featuring Echoes. For people who have been on this channel long enough probably know, I often find tracks over 6 minutes tend to drag on a little bit. However, this is one of the very few examples of tracks I feel is just the perfect length. Echoes is absolutely incredible vocals in combination with the strings and the keys in the verses are some of the most absolutely goosebump inducing verses I have ever heard. I find the first build-up drags on just a little bit, but overall changes enough and moves around to the point where I feel the length is necessary. That being said, the second drop brings one of the greatest build-ups I've still heard to date with those sputtering drop leads. These eventually lead into drops that, while they don't have these crazy and prominent backing elements, have shockingly full sounding saw chords, especially considering this track is from 2016. Follow that up with, again, one of the most dreamy, euphoric outros you'll ever hear, ultimately finishing one of the best Illenium tracks still to this date. Just an absolute masterpiece through and through. And finally, I want to round up on the project as a whole by going over the 3 aforementioned criteria. In terms of innovation, as mentioned earlier, Ashes is one of the pioneer albums that sparked the popularity in melodic dubstep and melodic bass. Listening to older Said the Sky and Illenium music tends to mold around that early 2010 sound that made Skrillex so popular, however with a melodic twist. This album completely took a brand new approach to EDM, with the sound design of early 2010s progressive house and trance, while bringing extremely organic, emotional, and soulful verses to the mix. Overall, one of the most innovative albums of the last decade, and that is without question. Obviously, in terms of sound, it has aged as time has gone on. Artists nowadays have managed to absolutely nail those drop saw stacks and leads, overall leaving some of the tracks in the dust when it comes to that aspect. The verses, however, managed to capture those vibes that a lot of tracks in 2021 would still have to this day. For them to hold up after 5 years just cannot be overlooked. Some issues here and there sound-wise, but overall, they're not egregiously outdated, and some tracks even manage to be completely perfect in that regard, such as Afterlife, Without You, and It's All On You. In terms of execution, another issue that's just more of a result of age rather than actual production. Lots of the tracks do admittedly have very basic ideas by modern standards, however still manage to keep some of the key aspects that drops to this date still have, like the aforementioned Fortress pluck and the automations and spirals. Also in terms of fills, the tracks just aren't exactly there, with the drops being very lead and soft forward. Artists like Crystal Skies have absolutely nailed the art of the fill, and some of the tracks in that aspect feel outdated. That being said, the ideas brought forth with the saw-heavy, melodic drops is once again a concept still being used in practice to this date. One that's kind of just harder to judge like sound, but overall still manages to have some songs that compare to today's standards. When combining all 3 criteria, it's pretty evident why Ashes is as impactful to listeners as it is. Illenium's inclusion of organic instrumentation and melodic saw-forward drops was something rarely seen in EDM, and the execution of the ideas and the quality of the sounds overall turned the bass scene on its entire head. While it's admittedly the least favorite album of the trilogy for me, it's overall one I can truly respect and realize its impact it's had on the scene. And that should be it from me, guys. Let me know what you think of this album down below, and overall the kind of format that I'm going for here. I'm just always kind of trying to look to improve my work, and leaving comments is a great way to do so. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you later. Peace.